Savills, Knight Frank, Humberts, Chestertons, the Posh Estate Agency brands. What are the future of them? Talk to me, Ian.
Well, I think they fundamentally are going to be changing over the next few years. And the critical part about these, what I would call super brands that have been dominating the top end, is that I think there's a danger that they can be resting on their laurels. And they've relied on the brand above the door rather than the quality or the practices within their business.
What authority have you got to say that?
Well, I used to be the MD of Humberts.
All right, so you know your stuff.
And I used to work for Hamptons, and both are great companies.
Okay.
I've traded against the likes of Savills and Knight Franks for years, and so I've got the knowledge of that sector more than most.
I mean, let's visit the two big ones, Savills and Knight Frank. What would you do if you were running those?
Well, I think I would take a proper fundamental look at the way those companies are run right now. I think there's a danger that they've stuck their head in the sand, and their operating practices are, let's face it, what they've been doing for years. And in order to continue to be at the forefront of agency, I think they need to modernise.
I mean, I've heard from very reliable sources that their branches, especially outside London, because let's be frank, the top end of the market is very restricted at the moment. There's not many houses coming on the market. More importantly, not many selling at the top 25% quartile. They really are dropping their pants on their fees. I mean, the old adage of it's 2% plus, 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 everything was plus. Those days have gone. Do you think this is the start of the end of Savills?
I don't think I'd be as dramatic as saying it's the end of their brand, but I think they are under more threat now. The likes of Savills and Knight Frank are under more threat now than they ever have been, because
I've heard 1% with everything in.
Well, there are lots of examples of Savills and Knight Frank quoting at 1% all in with marketing and photography and all of that. But the critical part is that the brands can still command good fees if the practitioners are confident about what they're delivering and the service they provide.
Because let's be frank, you've got some very, Fine and Country, which, let's be honest, is a franchise or a license, I think they like to call themselves. I had David Lindley sat where you were a few weeks ago. They really are pulling their pants up at the moment and giving these guys a good run for their money.
Well, you touched on a really good point earlier about the lack of transactions in that top end, and so that, as a consequence, the top end brands are starting to hunt in the mid and upper end. So therefore,
but won't that water down?
Exactly, but it all means that it's congealing in that mid market. That you've got the likes of the aspiring fine countries trying to nick market share. You've got the big brands trying to steal market share from some of those agents that are more mid market, and I think that's where the pressure on fees is starting to have an impact. And also you've got to be looking at the quality of the staff at the front end. Is what I would challenge is, have they got the best in class running their branches, doing their viewings, or have they lost sight of that because they've become complacent because of the brand above the door?
Do you think in some instances, not all, they have become complacent?
I think that's certainly true. I wouldn't say it's across all of those two specific brands or across all the top end brands, but I think there's always a level of complacency if your competition hasn't been that great. And there's also a problem that if you're trying to hunt and kill in that mid-market, you start to change the quality of the staff you have, or you go for different types of staff than you would normally recruit. And that's fine, but the danger is you lose the DNA of your company.
Yes, by going into the middle pool, the upper middle pools, you're not going to be as exclusive.
Yeah.
And again, you're talking the right sort of staff. Do you think the likes of Savills and Knight Frank train their staff enough?
Well, they do have very good, particularly Savills have very good training programs. It would, what I would challenge on their training would be the type of training. So are they genuinely navel gazing and making sure they're trying to affect change, or are they just continuing to do what they did yesterday for tomorrow? And I think that's the part that I would be focusing on if I was running Savills.
Interestingly, I mean, looking at your LinkedIn CV, you've been there, done that, and you've had some decent jobs, and now you work as the UK boss for ActivePipe, which is a marketing firm, and they're from Australia. The point I'm trying to get across is that in Australia, the brand is not as important as probably the person behind it. It's more the agent in the clothed in a coat of credibility in the brand. Whilst in the UK, you don't ask Jim Bob or Jane Smithers, because they're posh people at Savills. You ask Savills, don't you?
You do, but that is a problem though, because
But it's that's not just Savills, that's across the board, isn't it?
it is.
In
Although,
the UK estate agency.
but if you look in some, particularly in some London boroughs or in some of the high value provincial towns, you still have that Mr. Guildford or Mr. Sherborne, or I think of Mike O'Flaherty, who sadly passed away recently in Maidenhead. He was, working for Roger Platt. He'd been there for years. Absolutely, he was the king of Maidenhead. He was the best agent in that town, and people used to go to him because of that.
But yes, but again, how old was he? In his 60s?
Yeah.
Okay, are there people in their 30s and 40s on that conveyor belt up to become Mr. Maidenhead or Mr. Slough or Mr. Sevenoaks?
Yeah.
Are there?
That's the problem. Is that I think when I started in the industry, when I was a wee lad, there was a whole load of us coming into it because at the time actually agency was quite sexy.
Yeah, it
to get
was.
into, wasn't it?
Yeah, he used to razz around in a Vauxhall Nova and
Well,
sell a few houses.
I went into it because I wanted to get a white BMW because the boss had that, and I thought, well, that'd be great. And so you work your backside off for that car. You don't get that now. It's not glamorous anymore. It's a hard graft. You still need to do the hours. You're not paid as well as other professions, and therefore a big problem for whether it's Savills or any brand across the UK is to attract the right people with the right attitude who are going to be your leaders of the future.
Do you think the likes of Savills and Knight Frank and other estate agents should push their staff more and make them the face of their agency as opposed to the name across the door?
I think you've always got to personalise your business, and I think you've got to have strength in your ability as a leader of a business to bring the next guys through, and not think of them as a challenge for your own personal space.
It's very interesting that there's a chap called Jonathan Hanford who works for Fine and Country in the Midlands, and he won the Fine and Country Best Agent in the whole of the world at their conference. And isn't it interesting that he does videos of him outside properties and him on the village green talking about the local property markets in the posh villages?
Yeah.
There has to be a connection there.
Yeah.
And I would say to the likes of Savills and Knight Frank, in fact all agencies, is don't be afraid to put your staff at the front. In fact, I think you need to push them to the front. Don't rely so much on your font and your brand. Do you agree? Or?
Absolutely. I think it's always, our industry has always been a personality driven industry.
But we sell on brand.
That's the problem, is that we spend, as a lot of business owners spend a lot of money on their brand and then forget to invest in their people. And also it's about that continuity of good people. Keeping hold of those good people is worth a lot.
Of course it is.
And I think as a leader, if you can make sure that you've got the next, the 25, 30-year-olds that are going to be your big fee earners for the future, they're the ones that you need to be spending time on.
Well, I know in the next video we're going to talk about thinking long-term versus short-term, and this is classic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.